You're listening to The Step Back, a Mavs podcast.
I'm too hot right now. Step back. Step back. I ball like the Mavs, running this beat like a lab. Luka Doncic the step back, Lord, that boy need a map. Dirk in his bag, I swear I feel it in the air. Dirk in the game, snapping like a crab, but he never fold when they in the jam. Dennis Smith Jr. coming with the jam, got the whole team cooking in the lab. I say I'm the best, I'm going super saiyan. I'm in the booth spitting cause I can. I'm so fly and I may never land. I thank God for every one of my fans. SOD Trig, just for the chance. Dirk catch five, they ain't got a chance. This came from God, this wasn't chance. Defense for real, coming with the clamps. Promise it get scary, killing beats and bury. I ain't never worried, never in a hurry. Crazy comments, it don't ever hurt me. Feelings I'm dispersing, is it really worth it? Never said I'm perfect, shine like a star. Any beat I get, I promise I'm a merchant. Still a humble servant, coming at your service.
Welcome everybody to another edition of The Step Back, a Mavs podcast. My name is Dalton Trigg, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host and DallasBasketball.com colleague, Matt Galatson. You can follow along with all of our Mavs-related content on Twitter at Dalton_Trigg and at Matt Galatson. You can also follow the podcast itself at Step Back Mavs, where we'll post the links for every episode. If you love Mavs basketball talk, be sure to rate our podcast and subscribe to it. We're currently on Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Pocket Casts, and we will very soon be on iTunes as well, so be on the lookout for that. Matt, how you feeling tonight?
I'm good, man. I'm excited for our second episode, and I just got done listening to that new intro of ours, and it's gonna be a good night.
Oh yeah, little background story for people tuning in and hearing our new intro song there. My good friend Drew Johnson, grew up with him. We went through elementary school, and he is now an assistant college basketball coach. And I was just sitting there the other night, and I texted him up. I was like, "Hey man, do you have anybody that can that would take on this project we're looking to do, customize intro song and all that?" And he's like, "Yeah, one of my former players does that." And sure enough, he put me in contact with Andrew Bishop. He's from Columbus, Mississippi. You can find him on Twitter. It's at Drew32 all day. He's on SoundCloud just as Andrew Bishop, and he's on AudioMac too as Drewpac. That's DREWPAC. And he told me to mention that he has an EP that's about to drop on Thursday. So if you guys want to check out his music there, just be on the lookout. He's got an EP dropping then. But we can't thank him enough for putting in the time and getting us that awesome new intro that should be a staple on the Step Back going forward.
Yeah, man, it's so unbelievable. It's so far beyond what I expected. When you sent it to me the other night, I mean, we were talking about just texting back and forth during the Lakers game, and then about an hour later, you sent me this SoundCloud link, and I was like, oh, it's just another one of his songs. And it was literally like an hour later, he just dropped this absolute Godzilla flame of an intro for us, and I could not be happier. It is so good.
That's what the craziest thing was about it, is how fast he did it, because I remember we were talking about it. He was like, well, what kind of time frame are we looking at? And I was like, well, we got this generic intro right now that'll get us by. I mean, I told him to take his time. It wasn't any big rush at all, and then bam, there it was, not even an hour later. I mean, dude's mad talented.
I know, man. When he blows up, he better give us front row seats at the AAC when he's playing next to J. Cole, because that dude is super talented, man.
That's what I'm saying. But getting past that, we'll just jump right into it, Matt. It's no news to anybody that the Mavs lost to the Lakers the other night. It was just completely disheartening. They had a 15-point lead at one point. They were up 13 at the half, and then Josh Hart, he's the one that hit the buzzer-beating shot to make it a 13-point lead at the half, and you could kind of feel the momentum shift. And then sure enough, they were down 6 after the third quarter, and they went on to lose that game by 10. But I mean, just a Lakers team that was missing LeBron, on the second night of a back-to-back. You're playing at home after losing two really disheartening road games as well. I mean, a lot of mistakes. It's just one of those games where when you come home, you want to turn it around, and they just couldn't do it for whatever reason. But what are your thoughts on the Lakers game?
Well, I mean, especially coming off that Philadelphia game, which was just an absolute slog. I mean, they played terrible the whole night. Somehow they got it within 6, but it was much more of a blowout than the 6-point score suggested. And then the Lakers game, it was just honestly, when the game started, I thought, man, they're going to blow them out. It's going to be a 20, 30-point win. It's going to be the Charlotte game again. And then as soon as Hart hit that shot at the half, you just knew that the momentum had shifted. And then when they lost that lead going into the fourth quarter, you knew it was over. And it was just it was probably the most embarrassing game they've played all season long, and that includes getting blown out by New Orleans.
Yeah, given the circumstances, I'd have to agree with you there, because you look at that New Orleans game, and I was in attendance for that first one they played in New Orleans and the second one, but the first one, they lost by 26, but they didn't have Dennis. They were shorthanded. They were on the second night of a back-to-back. I mean, if you're going to lose a game that badly, that was the circumstances you'd lose under. But the Lakers game the other night, it's, earlier in the season when they were losing a lot of these games, they were getting killed from behind the three-point line. Opponents were just hitting all kinds of crazy three-pointers on them, contested or not. The Lakers only made 8 threes. They were 8 of 29 in that last game, and they had 60 points in the paint to the Mavs 46. And that's one of the things that really stood out to me. Brandon Ingram scoring 29 points, 12 of 21 from the field. He hit 5 of his 7 free throws, and he didn't even attempt a three-pointer. So, I mean, they were just killing the Mavs inside, and it was like pulling teeth.
No, yeah. And what was super disheartening was just the overall what's the word I'm looking for? I mean, they just looked completely out of sorts in the second half.
Dysfunction is a word that comes to mind.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good way to describe it. I mean, the ball was just like flying around like it had Crisco on it or something, and Luka was getting cooked by Brandon Ingram. Him and Lonzo combined for, I think, 50 points, which together they average half of that on the season. And it's just one of those losses that it's really just inexplicable. I mean, there's no reason you should not beat a Los Angeles team that doesn't have LeBron James and is just a bunch of young prospects and old aging vets. And it's just disappointing, man.
Well, I mean, this is another thing that really, and I mean, you got to take into consideration again the Lakers without LeBron. I think they've until that game they had gone like 1-4 without him. But another stat you look at, the Lakers had 28 assists, and they only had 14 total turnovers. And you look at the Mavs, they had 12 assists and 19 turnovers. That is absolutely horrible. I mean, it's really hard to recover from something like that.
No, yeah, absolutely. And even Luka's line that was, I think he was 27, 8 and 2, but he only shot 10 of 23. He was 5 of 7 from free throws, but he got cooked on defense.
Only one turnover though.
Only one turnover, which is good.
DeAndre Jordan, on the other hand, 5 turnovers, led the team. I mean, you can't have that.
You can't have that. I mean, he can't keep playing or being told to play, at least, like he's Nikola Jokic or Marc Gasol. He's just not that kind of player. They're paying him to, protect the rim and rebound and get the occasional lob, and he's not protecting the rim. They're paying him $22 million, and he looks like a log on defense. He's just been absolutely atrocious, and I don't know what the advanced stats say about it, but
Well,
he's not doing what he needs to do over there.
that's the weird thing, because if you look at DeAndre Jordan at his advanced stats, especially when it comes to defense, it's one of those things where the eye test isn't necessarily agreeing with some of those stats, because I mean he apparently isn't as bad as what we've seen, but I mean it's pretty hard to ignore when your 7-foot center, almost 7-foot center, isn't putting his hands up to contest shots and moving to help defense and all that stuff. I mean, we're seeing it with our eyes, but he's apparently not as bad defensively as what we think.
No, and obviously there's so many other problems as well. Wes Matthews looked like he was trying out for Average Joe's Gym last night, just throwing the ball around, careening it off the backboard. He was 2 of 8 from the field, 1 of 6 from 3. He just man, he continues to do too much and or try to do too much, and it's. We talked during the game via text about how he's just not he should not be a starter anymore. They need to shift stuff up. I wrote about it on DallasBasketball.com after the game. Something needs to change, whether that's Wes coming off the bench, starting Maxey, or at least playing Maxey more than 5 minutes. And there's just too much going wrong right now for this team to make any kind of a recovery or in a playoff push.
Well, one of those things that I'm pretty passionate about right now that needs to change. I believe with every fiber of my being that Maxi Kleba needs to be in the starting lineup. And I think Wes needs to be moved to the bench. He needs to become a 6-man. They could use his 3-point shooting. Obviously, he wasn't great in the Lakers game. He shot 1 for 6 from deep, but he's been really good from deep all season. The best he's been since his Portland days. He's almost matching what he was at before he tore his Achilles, but he's not the same defender he used to be. Him being in the starting lineup is keeping Harrison Barnes from being slid down to the small forward spot where he needs to be. I mean, it's just not working. Tim Cato wrote a piece after the game, and he noted in there that the Mavs starting lineup is it's over -7. That's what their overall net rating is for this year, which would be the worst of any other starting lineup in the NBA. So I mean, you have to change something, and I think with Maxey being 4th in the league in positive net rating, he was on that top 20 list, and all other 19 players on that list were starters. I mean, it's just the most logical move that the Mavs make next, and I think Rick Carlisle has to start Maxey.
Well, yeah, I mean, and you look at it, he can do so many things that the Mavericks are lacking right now. Like, he's easily, in my opinion at least, the team's best rim protector. He can rebound. He can shoot threes. I mean, not at a great rate, but he can shoot them. He can at least stretch the floor a little bit. And he can also step out and guard guys on the perimeter. I mean, we talked about it earlier. He was going full court, guarding people late in the game last night. He has that kind of athleticism. And for him to play 5 minutes and for Dirk and Dwight to combine for 28 minutes, it's inexcusable. And another thing about Wes, we saw this a little bit last year with Dirk, or at least we had a hypothesis about him coming off the bench is, I mean, he would do, I think at least, much better against second unit players rather than having to guard the opposing team's best player and have to go against the opposing team's better defenders when he can come off the bench and go against second teamers?
Well, I think that's right, but going back to the to what I was saying about Maxey starting and everything, I don't think you can't blame this on one particular mistake. Even though I think starting Maxey would really help the team out, I don't think that that fixes all the problems that they have. Dirk, it doesn't matter what amount of minutes he plays, even if it's against second team, other teams' second units. If he's not able to score the ball, then there's really no reason for him to be out there at this point. And I mean, it hurts to say that, but if he can't get his efficiency back, I mean, he was 0 for 10 in the Boston game, and I know a couple of those at the end were just him jacking them up to try and appease that very excited Boston crowd wanting him to score, but still, it's hard for a 40-year-old player that's been in the league as long as Dirk to come back and, especially from ankle surgery, to produce the way he did before. And if you look at the history, there's only 3 players that have played 21 seasons. That's not including Dirk and Vince Carter this year. But if you look at the other 3 players that did it was Kevin Willis, Kevin Garnett, and there's one other guy I'm not thinking of. But anyway, if you look at their stats, they're horrible. So the few players that have played 21 seasons, it hasn't been good. So that kind of worries me that Dirk can't get back to where he needs to be. But I talked to him in New Orleans that last game they played, and he was very positive. He says he feels good physically. He still thinks he's not where he can be, so he still thinks there's another gear, to put it in his words, but we'll just have to see. But like I said, it's not on one player. It's a full team effort right now, and they're just not very good. They got to make some changes.
Well, at a certain point, it kind of has to come back to the coaching, doesn't it?
It has to.
When you keep trotting out the same lineups, and I know against Charlotte they kind of changed a little bit of what they do with the rotations and whatever, but like what they're doing is not working, and that at a certain point has to fall on Rick Carlisle's shoulders. And maybe it's I don't want to say that he has too much free reign. I mean, he is the head coach, for crying out loud, but like maybe, and for all I know they've done this, and they probably have. I mean, we're not sitting in the Mavs front office watching everything they do, but maybe Donnie and Mark and some of the assistant coaches need to sit down and be like, okay, look, we've noticed these things that we need to change, and we need to start doing this or doing that, or this season is going to spiral out of control, and we might get caught into a gray area in which we don't make the playoffs, which is what we want to do, but we also miss out on our lottery pick, which is top 5 protected.
Well,
which would be a nightmare.
The thing that would be a nightmare. The thing that I don't understand, in the Charlotte game, Charlotte was missing Zeller and Lamb in that game, if I'm not mistaken.
They were.
But you're still playing on the road, and Kemba Walker has been amazing this season. So I mean, it was still an environment where you weren't exactly sure how it was going to turn out for them, and then they went in there and beat them by almost 40 points. But the thing that stood out to me in that game is Carlisle did change it up a little bit. We talked about it on the last pod a little bit about how he was inserting Dennis Smith Jr. and Harrison Barnes in there with 3 of the bench players, and he was just mixing it up. It wasn't just full 5-man substitutions, and it seemed to keep the flow going. It kept everybody in a rhythm, and it was just a wire-to-wire win. I mean, to me, after watching that, and with the Mavs being fully healthy in that game, I don't know why they didn't just carry that over to the next two games. There was no reason in my mind that they should go back to it, but lo and behold, you get to Boston, and it was like he went back to how he was doing his rotations in 2018. I mean, I just didn't understand it. And then he did the same. He basically did the same thing in Philadelphia, even though he was down a couple players there, but it was the same thing there. It was just, 5-man substitutions. I don't think that's going to work for this team.
No, and the whole thing about the 5 in, 5 out thing is, not only is it predictable and teams can plan around it where you're okay, Luka and DeAndre and Wes and Dennis are all going to come out with 5 or 6 minutes left in the first quarter, and they're not going to come back in until 5 or 6 minutes left in the second quarter, and they're basically sitting for an entire quarter. I mean, I get that you need to rest your players, but at a certain point, you got to throw something different out there. Otherwise, you become I don't want to say this, but otherwise you become what the Dallas Cowboys were before they traded for Amari Cooper. Predictable and stagnant.
Right.
And that's what they've been.
Well, and I've seen a couple people make this point for why he rests Luka for such long stretches. Everybody's saying that he's not in bad shape, but he's not in the same. He's not in the NBA shape that he needs to be right now. He's in better shape than both of us, obviously, and everyone else that's probably listening right now, or you would hope so. But he's just not. He's not where he needs to be right now, and I think that's probably the reason why he's being benched longer stretches. But I mean, like Dennis Smith Jr. To me, there's no reason why he shouldn't be playing 35 minutes a night. And
yeah, he only played 27 against LA.
Yeah, and I mean he's averaging around that number of minutes per game this year. So I mean, he's actually gone down from what he was in his rookie season. Now he's also been injured. He had that sprained wrist, and that kept him out for a little bit, and then there were a couple of games where his minutes were down because of that. But I mean, he needs to be out on the court playing 35 minutes a game, playing through his mistakes, because that's the only way he's going to learn. He's a much improved defender. He's a much improved three-point shooter. He still turns the ball over a lot, though. And I mean, that's the only way he's going to grow and learn from that, is if he gets consistent minutes. And I don't think Carlisle can keep favoring Barea as much as he does, to Dennis. I think Dennis needs to be getting the share of the minutes. And I think a lot of those players, I mean, and that like we were talking about in the Charlotte game, you can get him more minutes by mixing him in with some of the bench guys. So I mean, there's ways to do it. He's just not doing it right now.
Yeah, and another thing is there's absolutely no reason that Wes Matthews should be playing more minutes than Dennis Smith.
Ever.
I don't care what anybody says. That is ridiculous. And he played 32 minutes against LA, and Dennis played 27. That should not happen. He was shooting better. He was making better decisions with the ball. I mean, he had 4 turnovers. But when you're playing a guy 32 minutes because he's an $18 million player, just because he's an $18 million player, and he's turning the ball over 3 times with only 5 points, that's absurd.
Well, I don't know Rick Carlisle as well as some people might, but just from what I've seen and what I've heard, and even talking to him a few times, he just seems like the kind of person that wants to reward guys that work hard. And there's no doubt in my mind Wes Matthews is one of the hardest working Mavericks out there. I mean, I'm sure he busts his butt in practice and, in the weight room. And, he gives such an extraordinary effort that in Carlisle's mind, he's thinking, I can't not play this guy. Even though, the stats are staring him in the face, like, you should probably bring this guy off the bench. But and play him lesser minutes, make him play more within his role. But I think that's one reason why we haven't seen a change yet. He has so much. Rick Carlisle has so much respect for Wes Matthews and his work ethic. But I mean, it's not about that. I mean, you can't be afraid to hurt somebody's feelings in professional basketball. You have to. It's his job to figure out what works and to put a product out there that wins. So he's got to really look at that and make some changes in the second half of the season.
Yeah, and like we said earlier, I mean, we're not blaming this whole thing on Wes. It's a bunch of problems with a bunch of the bench players. I mean, nobody played well against LA. Nobody played well against Philly. Nobody played well against Boston. And it's getting to a point where you almost have to make – I mean, we'll get into this in a minute, but you almost have to make a drastic change because what you've got on the roster, I mean, they're a lot of times they're 12 deep, or they can be if they want to be, and they've got talent on the roster. They don't have enough of it, but they've got it, and there's no reason that they should be losing to teams like LA without LeBron. And maybe you have to make a drastic move, to kind of shake things up and realign people's perspective, because you can't have people like Wes, who's obviously playing for a contract. You can't, it's just bad all around.
You mentioned the roster having talent. I mean, I know that there's a lot of other Western Conference teams that have more talent than the Mavs, but there is absolutely no reason that the Mavs should be tied for 14th in the West. I mean spots 9 through 14 are pretty tight. You got to give them that. It's pretty tight, so they're not that far separated. I mean, it's night and day difference from what the Mavs are right now and what the Phoenix Suns are, which, they play them tomorrow night, so we'll see how that goes. But they're just underperforming what they're capable of. They could do so much more with just a few tweaks here and there. And I agree. I think there needs to be a drastic change. I think they need to make a trade, and not just for the sake of making a trade. I think there's a couple of very realistic options out there that would improve the team going forward. But even if they didn't make a trade, you make a couple of in-house moves with your starting lineup and your rotations, and I think you probably win 4 or 5 more games that you've already thrown away at this point.
Yeah, and we saw it earlier in the year when they were really hitting their stride. I can't remember exactly how many wins they had out of how many games, but it was when they climbed up all the way to, I think they were at 6th or 7th in the West.
They won 9 out of 11 at one point.
Yeah, and whatever they were doing then was working. I still didn't agree with the rotations, and we talked about it constantly about how we hated that, and if they changed that, it would be even better. But there was obviously something different about what they were doing then. Well, I can't tell you what it was exactly. But
if you look at it, and again, there's so many things you can point at, and it's not on one player, and it's not all on Rick Carlisle. Even though the further we get into this season, and if things keep going the way they are, and there aren't any major changes made, it's starting to fall more and more on Carlisle's shoulders at this point. But if you look, after they went on that hot streak, they're 3-11 in their last 14 games, and that was when Dirk came back for that last Phoenix game.
And Maxi's minutes started going down.
And Dirk, in those 14 games, he's been technically back. He's been cleared to play and all that. He's only played in 10 of them, but still, ever since he came back, and the rotations that they were used to, and Maxi getting consistent minutes and all that, when all that changed, it just seemed to really affect the team's rhythm, and they haven't recovered from it yet. They had that huge win in Charlotte, and you kind of thought, okay, maybe they can get back on track here, but as we saw this past weekend, that's definitely not the case. I mean, there's no other way around it. They've got to make some big changes here, or this season's pretty much over.
I'll tell you one change they need to make, and I think it's kind of obvious too. We've pointed it out on Twitter a few times, as have a few of our other Mavs Twitter brethren.
Don't you love him?
Dwight Powell is his PER, his player efficiency rating is 20. I don't understand how that's possible. He plays out of control, and he's still shooting threes, even though he's 19% from three. And he had, I think I saw Kirk Sirius face. I don't know his last name, sorry.
Kirk Henderson, that's my buddy.
Kirk Henderson of Mavs Moneyball fame. He pointed out that if you cut out there was a certain stretch where he hit I don't remember the numbers exactly. It was 6 of 9, or it was a pretty good clip. If you cut that little section out of his 3-point shooting this year, he's shooting 8%. So, at a certain point, you have to be all right, Rick.
Well, and
tell Dwight to stop shooting threes, please, for the love of God.
It's a weird thing too, because he shot around 33% from three last season, so he wasn't a terrible 3-point shooter. Last year, if he shot a three, the way he was shooting it, even though 33% isn't extraordinary. If he shot one last year, you're like, okay, I mean, he's making enough of them to justify it. He's shooting so many of them this year, it seems, with such little success, it's my God, when do you stop it? I mean, they can't keep rolling him out there and letting him shoot them, can they?
Well, no. I mean, it's the definition of insanity, Dalton. It's trying the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. We're 40 games into the season, and Dwight Powell still can't shoot threes. Last year was an aberration. Make it stop. There has to be another option. There's probably, at any given time, 4 other guys on the court who can shoot threes better than Dwight Powell. Unless he's on the floor with DeAndre Jordan, that's just a fact.
Yeah, we could go on and on about the Mavs issues. I know another thing that isn't being talked about as much lately, but Dorian Finney-Smith, he had a decent game against the Lakers. He went 4 of 5, had 8 points. But overall, he hasn't been able to hit any of his 3-pointers lately. He's been ice cold. And when they were on that hot streak, he was nailing them at a somewhere between 40 to 42% clip. So that's something else they've been missing. Like we've said, it's a lot of things. We could probably spend 2 hours venting, on what their problems are and what we want changed. But we'll leave it at that. We'll move on to the next item here. So, a report came out the other day by Sam Amico that the Mavs and the Hornets, but he mentioned the Mavs, are interested in trading for Kevin Love. What are your thoughts on this?
So, for me, it's kind of like a double-edged sword type situation. The first side is, he really checks a lot of the boxes for what the Mavs are looking for. He's a good rebounder. He can stretch the floor with his threes. He probably shoots threes better than anybody on the Mavericks. He's a good. I mean, like I said, he's a good floor spacer, but he can also pass really well. He can do a lot of different things, and it's the kind of move where not only does it shake things up, but it gives you a guy who really fits your system perfectly, and he's another guy also who can create his own shot. Like a big problem with the Mavs when Luka is not on the floor, or even Dennis has some problems with it sometimes, is and obviously Harrison Barnes has tunnel vision and doesn't know how to pass to save his life, but like
Drives me nuts.
no, it drives me crazy. But outside of that, like JJ off the bench, maybe they went, especially with the bench unit. Like there's not a lot of guys on the roster who can create their own shot, and Kevin Love gives you that. Now the other side of that is, and I think this part's a little bit overblown considering the Mavs cap situation, is his contract. And I think it's 4 years, $120 million, which obviously isn't ideal considering he's 30, which in the NBA is old. I'm 31, so if you think that's old, screw you. But like, I mean, it's especially like when people talk about contracts, it's like, okay, well, we're going to have him for 4 years, and it's going to be $30 million a year or whatever the numbers are. But that last year, he's an expiring contract, and if it's not working out, you move him. But also, he's still an attractive name. So, like, this summer, say you get him at the trade deadline. This summer, if, your core of what you have is, with everything else coming off the books, is basically Dennis, Luka, Kevin Love, and Harrison Barnes, who's probably going to opt in, and DeAndre Jordan, who I would imagine they're going to try and re-sign at a lower rate. Right. But other than that, like, people look at it and they're like, wow, that is a strong group where something can build. Well, so I would be okay with it.
Yeah, and I think they definitely need a true stretch four. You can't keep playing Harrison Barnes at that position. But all that being said, I'm not really as concerned with Kevin Love's contract as much as I am, his injury status. Like, how can he stay healthy at this point? He's 30, going on 31. Is he close to a decline? That's more what I'm thinking. As far as the money goes, the Mavs can afford it. I mean, you've got your two best players, or your two young corner pieces right now, Luka and Dennis. They're still on their rookie contracts, and they're going to be on their rookie contracts for a long time. So, I mean, you can afford to make a trade like that. I mean, me personally, I would rather go the Otto Porter Jr. route because, I mean, he's 5 years younger than Love. He's not a power forward, but, I mean, he's a tremendous three-point shooter. I think he's being misused in Washington. I just feel like even though everybody thinks he's overrated, or most people think he's overrated right now, and he's making way too much money, I think if the Mavs pulled the trigger on Porter Jr., he would end up being pretty close to a star in Dallas. And I think he'd definitely be better than what Harrison Barnes is right now. And Harrison Barnes is pretty good when he's not, like you said, when he just has complete tunnel vision and forces shots up. But, yeah, the Kevin Love thing, I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to it if if Casey Smith and that medical staff think he'll be okay going forward. But I don't even know. Sam Amico, I mean, I'm not saying anything bad about him. He's got some good work and everything, but I just don't know if he has the connections to know 100% if the Mavs are really interested in Love or not. But from a fit perspective and knowing that they need a true stretch four, I mean, I could kind of see it.
Well, no, I agree with you on the whole Porter Jr. thing. I mean, I think he's a better fit as far as, as far as age and his ability to defend, and he's a very good 3-point shooter when he gets going. And I think he probably, I have no basis in this. It's just a gut feeling, but I think you probably have to give up less to get Porter Jr. than you would to get Love. So there's also that to think about. Because Washington they're one of those teams who's just looking to blow it up. They may not have admitted it yet, but everybody knows it. And so they're looking to shed contracts, and if you did something like sending Wes's $18 million expiring contract and Dwight and maybe a second round pick or whatever,
Yeah.
You take back a contract, I don't care. Like they have a much better hope of pulling off something like that, and it might be a better all around fit. And honestly, it just makes more sense than Kevin Love. But I would be happy with either one.
Yeah, and it feels like we've been talking about the Washington Wizards breaking things up forever now. We've had Brad Beal pipe dreams since before last season started. It seems like so. I think it's definitely time. They made a last ditch effort to trade for Trevor Ariza. They thought he was gonna fix everything apparently, and obviously that hasn't fixed anything. John Wall.
That was a brilliant idea.
Yeah, John Wall. He has had the foot surgery. I believe it was foot surgery that he had, and he's out for the foreseeable future. They're gonna start owing him somewhere in the neighborhood of 38 to 40 million next season, so that hurts, and they're definitely not going to be able to trade him. But I think Porter Jr. is the most realistic option, and I could definitely see the Mavs doing it. Now, the Mavs themselves have pretty much, denied interest here since those reports came out on Porter Jr., but
that's what they always do.
That's what they always do, and it just makes too much sense to me. I could see them do it. I see this, and I was talking to somebody about this the other day, but knowing how Donnie Nelson is and knowing how Mark Cuban is, just their personalities and the way they operate, I could see this being an internal struggle. Cuban, he's not wanting to compromise cap space going into this summer and future summers, where Donnie Nelson, he's more about the here and now. He wants to, make it a better basketball team where he can. He wants to have better players on the roster. So I could see this being a thing where, Donnie wants to do an Otto Porter trade, and then, Mark Cuban probably not wanting to do it. But as we've seen, in recent history, it's probably best to let Donnie handle that stuff.
That is absolutely true. The whole planned powder thing that has been honestly a big joke as far as the Mavs are concerned over the last few years with landing free agents.
It's crazy.
We don't have any evidence of them. You can't even count DeAndre Jordan in this scenario. Like, there's no history of them signing big-time free agents. So you almost have to realize that until you become a dominant team like Golden State or obviously you want to build through the draft, but if you want to become a free agent destination, you first have to start winning.
Yep.
And if you're going to trade your lottery pick and go for it this year, your only option to get better at this moment is to make a trade. And I feel like whoever is on the other side of that, who's against it, just needs to get their ass in gear, because that's the only way it's going to happen.
Yeah, I agree with you. And, we can get into, a lot of other things regarding what trades the Mavs should or shouldn't make, and I'm sure there'll be some more rumors come up as we get closer to the trade deadline, which is on February 7th. So we're getting very close. We're under a month away before we get to that. But next, we're going to move on. Like we've been telling you guys on Twitter all week, we're taking your questions, and if you'll send anything that's on your mind to Step Back Mavs on Twitter, we've got our DMs open there, and we'll answer your questions. We'll start out with this one. This one's from All Things Mavs. It says discussion topic: one or the other is bound to happen, in my opinion. So which happens first? The Mavs go cold at home or get hot on the road?
I'll take this one first. I think it has to be they get cold at home because they've been great at home this year. I think after the Lakers game, they're now 15-4 at home. But the way they've been playing lately, it's trending downhill. So there's been nothing that they've been doing to suggest that, to me, that they get on a hot streak on the road, considering they have the worst road record in the NBA. But also, everything they've been doing has been trending downwards, like I said. So there's nothing that points upwards to me as far as home, especially with the schedule they have coming up. I mean, I know they've got Phoenix and they've got Golden State and San Antonio, so it's going to be tough. And it's I don't see any way that they even stay, if they even stay hot, at all, period, no matter where it is.
Well, I don't think they'll get, ice cold at home. I think that's probably the more realistic possibility, like you said, given how things have trended lately. But after the Phoenix game, they've got Minnesota this week. They've got Golden State over the weekend. And then they've got San Antonio next Wednesday. After that, they're at Indiana, at Milwaukee, and then their next two home games after that towards the end of January, or let's see, you've got at New York, at Detroit, and then you've got at Cleveland on February 2nd. So after the Minnesota game this Friday, their next 5 road games are going to be against East opponents. And all of those games are very winnable, except the Milwaukee game. You almost have to assume that's going to be a loss, but they tend to play pretty well against Milwaukee. At least they have lately. So, I mean, there's a chance they could get hot on the road, but given what we've seen so far, I don't know how likely that is, but it's possible.
Well, yeah, I mean, especially when you consider they've lost to Phoenix twice on the road by double digits.
Yeah, just stuff like that, it just crushes your spirits. All right, next question is from Zach. He gets right to the point here. Who is the Mavs starting center next year? I'm not going to give an answer that most people would want. It's not the sexy answer here, but I think they stick with DeAndre Jordan. They've got $52 million in cap space. They could come to an agreement with Jordan, use that $52 million elsewhere, and then still go over the cap to sign him back. Even though a lot of people are frustrated, even though a lot of fans are frustrated with him, I think management and the team itself, I think they like Jordan. They value what he brings as far as rebounding and finishing at the rim. So I think they'll opt to stay with Jordan this summer.
Okay, and I agree with you. But just to be different, I'm going to throw out a different scenario. And I think the center that could possibly be the guy that, they see as their future and could be really an upgrade over DeAndre in a lot of areas is he's already on the roster, and his name's Maxi Kleber. I think that he's affordable. I think that DeAndre might not want to take a pay cut. at the level that the Mavs would need him to take that pay cut, and he could probably make the most sense. I mean, he already brings better rim protection. He can do more things offensively. He's a really good athlete, and he's just kind of now coming into his own as a basketball player, even though the Mavs are keeping the leash on him for whatever reason. But that's a thing that I could really see happening. Now, back to your point, though, I think that the most odds are that the thing that's going to happen is DeAndre is going to come back. At least in my opinion, I think he's too close with Rick, and I think the fit is good as long as he can improve some other aspects of his game and stop trying to be Nikola Jokic.
Yeah. Well, moving on to this next one here, I think I know the answer to this, or what you think the answer to this is going to be. It's probably going to be pretty short, but Tyler asks, should the Mavs consider Marc Gasol if he opts out and becomes a free agent next summer?
I'll tell you this in every language I know how. No.
Yeah, I figured that's what you were going to say there, and my answer is no too, but I will say he would be an extraordinary fit for the roster as far as how he plays, what the Mavs need from a guy like him. He's a center. He doesn't play, he's a decent defender from what I've seen, and he can shoot threes and everything, but he's 34 years old and he's had foot issues, and it would have to be a really cheap contract, and even then I just don't see him signing anybody older than DeAndre Jordan, who's 30. So
no, I don't either. And I mean, he used to be an elite defender, but his game's obviously taken a big step down. He's still a very good player, and he's probably going to do very well against the Mavs when they meet later in the season. But, I mean, moving forward in the future, there's just no logical reason to give that guy a contract, in my opinion. At least not, as a starting caliber player.
All right, we're going to go to Michelle next. She says, if we want to replace DJ with Vucevic, something I mentioned earlier, as an option, and Wesley Matthews with Chris Middleton, is that, one, affordable, and two, does it make us a contender, or at least a few rounds deep in the playoffs? I'll start this one. Yes, it would be affordable, because like I said, they'll have at least $52 million to spend this summer. That's if Harrison Barnes and Dwight Powell opt in, which I expect them to. That's also assuming there's not going to be, another trade that has those two players going out. But yes, it is affordable, and I think it would make the Mavs a contender. I think they only get past the first round, maybe the second round, given how the West is. But Luka's going to get better. Dennis Smith Jr. is going to get better, and I think that core would be pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, if Middleton specifically is just a perfect fit for what the Mavs do. He's a very good defender. He can stretch the floor. He doesn't have tunnel vision. He doesn't try to do too much, which is something we've been harping on all night. And I do think that it would be a very good fit for both players, really. And obviously it's it's a hypothetical, but as far as affordability, they've got as much cap space as anybody, so of course it's going to be affordable. Even if Harrison opts in, I think they could easily pull something like that off. It's just a matter of being able to pry Middleton away from Milwaukee, where he has thrived, and I don't know that he necessarily wants to be anywhere else but Milwaukee.
Yeah, I mean it's going to be hard to pry him away from Milwaukee. Vooch, though, I mean, you could probably get him. I think Orlando's going to let him walk. You could get him easily in a trade right now, in my opinion. But we're going to move on to our last question here, and it's from Hayden. And he asked about the odds of the Mavs pursuing Kristaps Porzingis this summer, because there's been a report that New York doesn't want to give him the full guaranteed max.
Okay, well, I'll make this one short. This is a pipe dream. Obviously he's just an absolute dream for the Mavericks, and it would be, don't tease me, come on, this is just too much. But there's no evidence that he is gonna get out of New York. They want their hope is to have a core of Kevin Durant and Kristaps and probably Zion Williamson if they keep doing this terribly. So, as much as I want it to happen, and Fish is going to have something coming out about this soon, but I just don't see it happening.
I could see the Mavs chasing after him, like you said. I don't know what the chances are of New York actually letting him walk, but I'll say this. If they're not going to give him a fully guaranteed max, they obviously have some concerns about his knee going forward. It feels like it's been forever since we've seen Porzingis on the court. And, there's no set timetable for him to return to action right now, so it could be a while before we see what he looks like. I don't even know if he's going to play the rest of this season. You'd think he would, but, he may just, take his chances into the summer. But I could see the Mavs, doing a fully guaranteed max, structure it similar to how they stole Chandler Parsons from Houston, even though this is a whole nother animal with Porzingis. But I think they have a shot. I don't know. It's hard to see the Knicks letting him walk, but if he did, oh my goodness. So
yeah. And they do have the Dirk card in their corner. He is a big fan of Dirk, so I guess we'll just have.
That is true, and Porzingis played against Luka overseas, and they seem to have a pretty good relationship too. So we'll see how that goes. We're definitely with Hayden on that idea there, but
for sure.
Well, this completes our second episode of the Step Back. It's going to get better every week. We plan on having some special guests in the near future. How you feel about our second episode being in the books?
Very good. Just I would like everybody to please like, rate, and subscribe as often as you can. Tell your friends so we can keep growing and keep bringing you better content.
Yep, and like I mentioned in the opener, we've got our podcast on Anchor. It's on Google Podcasts. It's on Spotify, Breaker, Pocket Cast, Radio Public, Stitcher. And like I said, we're going to have it on iTunes. They tend to be a little bit slower than the rest of them, but it's coming. It should be any day now. So, we'll get ready for the Phoenix game tomorrow, and then they'll take on Minnesota Friday, and we'll get back on here as soon as we can and recap what's going on with the Mavs.
All right, sounds good, man. Looking forward to it.
Yep, we appreciate all you out there listening.
Dennis Smith Jr. coming with the jam, got the whole team cooking in the lab. Man. It's crazy, music in Texas now.